behind closed doors. I'm a fool for your love.
My name is Anthony, and welcome back to the Anthony James Show here on Sports Fan Entertainment. Today it's time to give a quick look at the AFC West. Such an interesting division to me because a lot of weird things happen in this division. Two teams announced they're relocating. Two new NFL head coaches for this division. A lot of strange things. And this offseason, to me, I'll start out by saying this. I'll make all four division fans happy. I could see a scenario where every team wins 10 or more games. Definitely not all four of them, but I could see where each of them wins at least 10 games. However, that won't be the case, and I think we'll see the division fall in place about what it did last year. So let's start with the San Diego, or now Los Angeles Chargers. They didn't have that bad of an offseason. To me, I'm not the biggest fan, though. They had one of the weaker moves at head coach. They brought in Anthony Lynn. Besides the great name this man has, I thought he's one of the weaker head coach candidates. You're telling me a guy who a year ago was a running backs coach with no experience as an offensive coordinator can now be an NFL head coach. Also, the fact that the Buffalo Bills, who we've heard were in love with him, decided that, hey, we'd rather take Sean McDermott over you. That to me is some red flags. I'm not a big fan of the Anthony Lynn signing. I could be wrong. I definitely could be wrong, but I'm not the biggest fan. They bring in Russell Okung. They need a lot of help on this offensive line. So they take a Broncos offensive lineman who was struggling with the Broncos, pay him big offensive line money, which you had to. That's just how the market was this year. You had to pay big money even if they suck. And just because you paid big money doesn't mean he's going to be playing well. I'm just saying, okay? Don't get your hopes up there. Mike Williams, I like that addition. I think he's a good wide receiver. A nice compliment to Keenan Allen. Give some star firepower here on the offense, and that could be enough. However, you're talking about a tough division for the San Diego Chargers, and what I've seen the last few years is they just do not close out games. And maybe now that they're the Los Angeles Chargers, that will change, but there's a lot of times I thought they were going to win the game, they just didn't. Now, of course, other teams do that too, I know, but the Chargers, you're in a tough division. You really are. You could go 0-6, and it's not because you're a bad team, but because the other three teams are that good. And honestly, the Broncos, they're the next team, spoiler alert, but they're not like that much better, but I do think they're better than the Chargers. I think all three of these teams are better than the Chargers. And I know Slump, he's on here. He makes videos on this channel too. He's not going to like that. But I'm sorry. I think out of the four teams, this team's still at the bottom. Kind of unfortunate. I want to see this team do well. I just don't think they're there yet, and I think it's in part because of the offseason moves they made, in particular the new head coach. I'm sorry, I'm going to knock you on that one. That's just the case. Next up, the Broncos, who, like the Chargers, have a new head coach. Gary Kubiak, I really liked him, so I'm going to miss Gary Kubiak. I think he was a good head coach. So for their sake, hopefully this is a good move at head coach. Vance Joseph was a guy that I heard the Broncos were going to hire before Kubiak decided that he would be considered for the Broncos head coaching job. So they're getting their guy they would have got 2 years ago, except they won a Super Bowl in the 2 years. So at least they have that. The Broncos made some interesting offseason moves. I think they had one of, if not the best draft of the division. They let go of Russell Okung, and instead they bring in 2 6 men on the offensive line for the number 1 and 2 offensive lines, the Cowboys and the Raiders. So that's interesting. They were the 6th man for a reason. We'll see if that pans out or not. I'm kind of worried in that regard, but again, we'll see what happens there. Besides that, the draft, they really drafted for need in the first round, which we don't see a lot of times with the Broncos. They kind of did it last year, but this year they went one of the oldest players in this draft, and really in any draft. He's, 24? Garrett Bowles, I think he could be a good offensive lineman, but he's got to start playing well right away because, like I said, he's old. Uh, I like the draft, though. I think from start to finish, there are some key players, and I think you could get Bowles to contribute. You could get Jake Butt to contribute, which would be really good, because since Julius Thomas, the Broncos really haven't had a good tight end. And Chad Kelly, he could be the biggest surprise of them all. I've talked about Chad Kelly on this channel. I've talked about Chad Kelly on my channel. I've talked about Chad Kelly a lot and how much I like him, so I'm not going to keep going on about that. But let's be honest, I won't be shocked if Chad Kelly starts a game this season. I think he might be the best quarterback in that room. But the Broncos have an interesting quarterback situation. Like the Vikings, they're in a situation where they have multiple guys who could be considered the starter, not just on their team, but on other teams as well. So hopefully if the Broncos realize early on that, hey, Trevor Siemian doesn't need to be our starter, they can trade him away, and I could see the Broncos getting at least a third-round pick. I think probably a second or first-round draft pick from him. Teams are needy at quarterback. They are really needy. And if you see a situation like the Vikings or Cowboys last year where your starting quarterback goes down in the preseason, Trevor Siemian could be an enticing option at quarterback for a team. So I could see the Broncos getting high rewards for him. But DeMarcus Walker, I think he could be a good player in the second round. They draft 2 wide receivers. Hopefully they start to contribute because the depth is just not there at wide receiver. So they needed to make a move like this. Overall, I kind of like the Broncos offseason. However, I don't think they've done enough to... Because I look at it this way. I think their coaching staff went down, but their roster went up. So that kind of keeps it even. They went 9-7 last year. I can see them doing that again, maybe 8-8. Tough division still, because then you go on to the Chiefs and the Raiders. I think the Raiders get the division this year. Again, I'm not making an official decision till the end of August, but I think they have a good position right now. So let's talk about the Raiders. They didn't really make too many off-season moves, at least early on. Their biggest move for a while was just bringing Jared Cook in from the Packers. Age 30, a 2-year contract. I like that move because, hey, worst case scenario, he doesn't pan out. You cut him after this year, and you just have 1 year to deal with that. Or you let the contract expire after 2 years. I like this. I think Jared Cook, he's a good enough tight end, and really that's good enough for the Raiders. So I like that. I also like Cordero Patterson. Honestly, even though he's had moments, and really that's about it, moments, I actually did like Cordero Patterson and was hoping to see the Vikings bring him back. At worst, yeah, you're paying about $4 million a year for this guy, but he can return the ball, and that's huge to have in the NFL. Where you start out on offense is great, and while the Raiders' offense is good, being able to start out on offense in a nice spot, that is huge. So those are really the 2 biggest moves they picked up as in a free agent signing. For players they lost, they did lose an offensive lineman to the Broncos. They lost Latavius Murray. I think that's a fine move, and as a Vikings fan, I think that's a fine move. I think the Raiders made the right move letting him go. But the big move, Marshawn Lynch, they bring him in. I'll be honest, Raider fans, I wouldn't get your hopes up, and I think you're not getting your hopes up. I just kind of want to remind you, because I don't think this is that great of a move. I'm sorry, but Marshawn Lynch wasn't looking good his last year, and you're telling me a year off's going to help at his age? I'm not so sure about that. I'm really not expecting a lot from Marshawn Lynch. I think we're going to look back and be like, ugh, that was a bad move by the Raiders. I could be wrong. Maybe they'll get 1 year out of him, but that's about all I'm expecting from him. At most, 1 good year. Not a lot from Marshawn Lynch. Derek Carr, you have Derek Carr, and I'll be honest, the reason I'm picking them to win the division right now, at least, is because of Derek Carr. And if Derek Carr didn't get injured last year, I think that's what would have happened. I think they would have beat the Broncos week 17. They didn't. No Derek Carr, no win week 17, no first round bye, but I think they can do it this year. They end up taking a really good cornerback who had off the field concerns in the late portion of the draft. They take him in the first round. That's a position of need. The Raiders addressed it. They got arguably the best player there. They got a good safety in the second round. Like, this secondary is quickly becoming good, and in a year or 2 from now, we could be talking about a very good Raiders secondary once these players start to develop. that's a good move there. And really, yeah, they didn't focus too much on the offense. I guess later they picked a couple guys, but it was more of a defensive draft, and that's fine. I think that's where they just need more help there. So good job there. You're focusing more work on the defense. I like what the Raiders are doing right now. I think they have a decent team. We'll see what they do. Super Bowl contenders, definitely. And then finally, the Kansas City Chiefs, defending AFC West champions. It took a while, but finally somebody knocked off the Denver Broncos. They made some interesting moves. They cut Jeremy Maclin, which I'm kind of surprised. Yeah, he didn't have the greatest season in the world last year, but he's a good enough wide receiver for you guys. I don't think you don't miss Jamal Charles much, mainly because he hasn't been playing much. But yeah, Jeremy Maclin, I think you should have sucked that contract up for one more year. You didn't. That's not the worst, but you did it at a bad portion in the year. I don't know why you chose to do it so late in the offseason. But Jeremy Maclin, I think you're going to miss him. Maybe not a lot, but you are going to miss him. Eric Berry, you signed him. That's a good move. You needed to do that. I look at your offseason moves. Like I said, there's not really a lot that stand out in terms of free agents. To me, what stands out the most? Patrick Mahomes. Wow. What I mean is such a high risk, high reward. I think if the Chiefs can pull off a Super Bowl this year, it's because of him. It's not because of Alex Smith. For you guys, for you Chiefs fans, I'd be hoping and praying that Patrick Mahomes will be starting this season. Maybe not week 1, but by week 17, he should be starting. Because if the Chiefs, if I'm a Chiefs fan, I'd rather have a season where you miss the playoffs after letting Patrick Mahomes start than a season where you make the playoffs with Alex Smith and lose in the divisional round. I'm sorry, but I'd much rather go that route. And I think the Chiefs need to put in Patrick Mahomes, not necessarily early, but by the end of the season, preferably midway through the season, let him play. To me, what will make the Chiefs not just win the division, but be a Super Bowl contender is if Patrick Mahomes is the starting quarterback and can play well. That, to me, is the key for the Chiefs' success in 2017. Right now, I'd probably order this division: Raiders, Chiefs, Broncos, Chargers. That could change. If you wanted me to put a record to it, how about 12 wins for the Raiders, 11 for the Chiefs, 8 for the Broncos, 7 for the Chargers. I think that's fair. Tell me your predictions right now for these 4 teams in the comments below, and if you agree or disagree. I know I'll be hearing fans of the Broncos and Chargers probably disagreeing, or even the Chiefs, because I'm not having you win the division, at least right now. But yeah, tell me your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. If you're new, you can follow me on Twitter at AnthonyJamesTV, link in the description. Subscribe to my channel, Anthony James TV, for NFL videos there.
Behind closed doors, I'm a fool for your love.